Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class we will learn Tosfos Dibra Maschel, Bava de Reisha Pater Mutter. Let's begin by looking at the flowchart to see what part of the Gemara Tosfos is coming to explain. So at this point the Gemara had originally a question. Rav Masna asked, why does our Tana say that there are 8 cases of Yetzias Shabbos, and then it goes on to count 12? Abaye responded, why are you asking that it says 8 and counts 12? You should ask, it says 8 and counts 16. What are the additional 4 cases? The additional 4 cases are the cases at the beginning of the Mishnah where one person did the entire malacha. So the Mishnah says that if the ani did the whole malacha of achnasa into the hand of the balabayas, or did the whole malacha of itzah from the hand of the balabayas, it says ani chayev balabayas pater. So the balabayas is also being discussed over here. So those are another 2 cases for the balabayas, when the ani carried it into the balabayas' hand and he carried it out of the balabayas' hand. Then there's another 2 cases for the ani as well, when the balabayas carried it into the hand of the ani, or from the hand of the ani he carried it in. Once again, the Mishnah rules balabayas chayev ani pater. So the ani is also part of that case. So we have an additional 4 cases. So Rav Masna answered that doesn't trouble me, that the Tana doesn't count that as a case, since the person is not just pater, but it's pater and mutter. Since one person did the whole malacha, the other person is entirely mutter in his role. It was permissible for him to be there. That's what the Gemara said. And that's the part of the Gemara that Tosfos is going to come to explain. So we said that's not a question, why it doesn't count those cases, because those he doesn't count because they're mutter. But the other 4 are asr, those he should have counted. So let's begin with the general outline of Tosfos. The Gemara explained that when one person did the entire malacha, the other person is entirely mutter. Tosfos is going to come to explain, why is that other person entirely mutter? Why doesn't he have an isser of lifnei iver le'sitin michshol? Let's begin and look at the flowchart. The Gemara said that when one person did the whole malacha, the other person that's present in that story is entirely mutter. Tosfos asks, why is it mutter? But he was over, he transgressed the avera of lifnei iver le'sitin michshol. Tosfos now is going to hold up this question, and we'll explain that in a moment, how this is holding up the question. Tosfos says, even if it's a case, let us say it's a case where the person could have done the malacha entirely on his own, he didn't need the other person to be there, where then there's no isser of lifnei iver. In other words, the ani, when he did the achnasa, he could have done the achnasa without the balabayas. It happened to be he did it into the hand of the balabayas, but let us say that it's a case where if the balabayas wasn't there, he'd still be able to do the achnasa. And the same for the itzah. And the same thing we'll say for the balabayas. He could do the itzah without the ani, and the achnasa without the ani. In such a case, there's no lifnei iver. How do we know this? Because the din is that if a nazir, who's not allowed to drink wine, is given wine by another person, the halacha is that person was over on lifnei iver because he helped out the nazir. The Gemara explains over there that this is specifically where there are 2 sides of a river, and the nazir wouldn't be able to get the wine without the help of the other person. This shows us that only when the other person's help is needed, and the avera could not have been done without him, is there an isser of lifnei iver. However, when the isser could be done even without the other person, there's no lifnei iver involved. Says Tosfos, even if we'll say that, there's still a problem, because there's still another isser, not an isser minatera of lifnei iver, but there is an isser midarabanan. And the isser midarabanan is that a person is chayav to be mafresh, to separate his fellow from an avera. And in this instance, when the person allows for the other to take the item out of his hand and do a malacha, or to do the malacha by putting it into his hand, he's certainly not fulfilling that isser of the rabbanan, that they told him to stop his fellow from doing an avera. Here he's even playing somewhat of an agreeable role. So we can't answer that he doesn't need his help, because even then there's still an isser, and we can't justify the Tana saying pater and mutter. So how do we explain that it means pater and mutter? There should be an isser here. And Tosfos continues and says, and even if we'll say that the other person, we're trying to really talk about the isser of Haitzah. So the Tana says mutter because it is mutter regarding Haitzah. The question is, there's another isser of lifnei iver, there's another isser that you have to be mafresh your fellow. But if we could find a way that there's no other isser, then it'll be okay for us to say that it's mutter. So Tosfos says there is a way to find that it's entirely mutter. If the person that's allowing the carrying to happen into and out of his hand, he's allowing it to happen through a goy. The goy is the one that's carrying it into his hand and out of his hand. Tosfos says even then there still is a problem. It's still asr. What's the asr? What's the isser? Well, we find the source for this isser. Later on the Mishnah says that if a yid gives food to a goy, and then afterwards the guy carries it out of his house, the yid doesn't have to worry about that. So what do we see? That only if the guy comes into the home and the yid gives him food and then the guy carries it out, he doesn't have to worry about it. This indicates that if the guy, however, was in the other rishus and extended his hand inwards and wanted to in some way carry in or out, the yid couldn't participate. It's only since the yid gave it to him in his home and the guy in his own carried it out, was it okay. So therefore, since we have no way of explaining our Mishnah so that there should be no issa, the question stands, how could we say that when it says pater, it means pater and mutter? Just to explain here for a moment, why is it that part of it is in the question and part in the arrow? At face value, our Mishnah is talking about that there's two Yidden involved. There's no instance of a guy. Additionally, as far as we're concerned, we're going to say that if he took it into the hand of the person or out of his hand, the other person was needed. So therefore, the regular case of our Mishnah is that the person that allowed the malacha to happen, he didn't do the malacha, but allowed it to happen, was needed in order for the malacha to be done. And therefore, as far as we're concerned, it's lifnei iver. It's only that if we could answer it in such a way that it will resolve our question, we will do it. So therefore, Tosfos' question is, there's lifnei iver. And he goes on to say, and you cannot answer to me that maybe the yid wasn't needed, because there'll still be an isser. And you can't tell me, well, by a guy it wouldn't be usser, because it still would be usser. So there is an isser over here. How could we say that pater in our Mishnah means pater and mutter? And Tosfos answers that the case where it could be mutter is if it's a guy and the guy is doing it with his own items. In other words, when would a person who allows carrying into and out of his hand be entirely mutter? It'll be a case when the person that's carrying in and out is a guy, and the items that he's carrying belong to him, belong to the guy, and not to the yid. So to summarize, Tosfos asked, can we find a way to justify, to say that the person who allowed the malacha to happen in and out of his hand is pater and entirely mutter? Is there any way that we could find such a case, that there shouldn't be any isser? It seems that there'll be some isser there, either lifnei iver, or that he's chayav to be mafresh, or even if it's a guy. And Tosfos answers, yes, there is. The case that we could say that it's entirely mutter is if it's a guy that's carrying in and out, and the guy is carrying his own items. Just to summarize using a chart that might help a little bit in understanding the Tosfos. We have three things over here. We have the case, we have the din, the ruling, and we have the question, could it be our case? So there are four cases that we presented. A yid helped a yid who couldn't do it on his own. A yid helped a yid who could have done it on his own. Then we have a yid let a guy that's in a different rishus take something from his hand. He carried it out of the yid's hand, and it took out the yid's items. And the last one is that a yid let a guy that's in a different rishus take the guy's items from and into his hand. So the ruling would be, if the yid needed the other yid, then that other person that helped out, it's aser of lifnei iver. If he didn't need the other yid, he could have done it on his own. It's still aser, because you have to stop your fellow from doing an avera. Certainly you can't help him. If it's a guy, it's also aser. And we learned this out from a brisa that says that only if the guy entered the house and then carried, it's none of the yid's business. That indicates that if the guy was clearly already carrying, the yid can't permit it. However, the last and final case where the guy is carrying, but it's with his own items, that's permitted. And therefore, the first one can't be our case because it's aser. We're looking for a case that's mutter. Sending for the second case is also aser. The third case is also aser. So obviously the case that our Mishnah must be referring to is the last and final case where it's a guy with his own items.